Thanks everyone for coming. Really excited about this teddy bear talk with Daisy and John, who are here to ask what the hell is a cosmic trigger anyway, and is it time to pull it? I saw Daisy and John on YouTube after I kind of missed unceremoniously their talk in London last year, and sort of sat there with my partner, kind of saying like, oh, this would be really amazing at Teddy Bear, wouldn't it? Oh, I doubt that'd happen. And then realised they both lived in Brighton and thought, oh, what the hell? I'll ask them. And because I thought they had some really interesting things to say and some interesting and exciting and curious upcoming projects. Obviously, here to talk about Robert Anton Wilson, who is a joyous and contradictory influence, certainly in my life, and I'm sure probably lots of yours here as well. So I'll without further ado, I'll head over to Daisy and John, and they're going to kind of do a back-to-back kind of 10 or so minutes talk for a little while, and then we'll have a little break, and then we'll come back, and there'll be lots of time for discussion at the end. So Daisy and John.
See you all. Thanks for coming. Yes, Robert Anton Wilson. He was a guy, he made a huge impression on me the one time I met him, which was nearly 10 years ago now, which was towards the end of his life. And I was over in California researching a book about Timothy Leary, and I hadn't read a lot of his stuff at that time. And what I'd seen, I found a little bit frightening, because you come to his stuff and you think you're a fairly together person, you know how things work, and then you start reading Robert Anton Wilson, and a couple of paragraphs in he's shown that you're living in an illusion of your own creating, and it's not the sort of thing you want to be reminded of a lot of the time. And writing that book, this Timothy Leary book, it was one of those projects that's important that you undertake every now and again, in that it's something that you're completely, incapable of doing, and you've got no idea of how to do it. I'd never written anything, and I didn't know how to string a sentence together. And with hindsight, writing a full biography of a figure as complicated as Timothy Leary was a bit ambitious. So when the woman who runs Timothy Leary's estate said,
and I've got two mates coming.
Sorry, can you hear me at the back? Is that okay? You can. Okay. When the woman who ran Timothy Leary's estate said, "Oh, I'll take you to meet Bob," I said, "Great," but I thought, "Shit," because I've been going around interviewing all these people and sort of paranoid that they would ask, what have you done before? Who are you, and things like that. And I figured if one person was to finger me for the charlatan that I was at that point, it would be Robert Anton Wilson, because that guy was smart, that guy was wise. And so I met him with a slight sense of trepidation, and it just melted away straight away, because he was such a lovely guy. And ever since then I've paid attention to what people have said about him, and it's virtually impossible to find someone with a bad word to say against him, which is really rare for these guys who are the original thinkers, the real visionaries and things like that. Because as far as they're concerned, they see things that others don't. They see further, they're the ones who gets it, and they need to explain it to everyone else who don't get it. And when you think like that, a lot of these people, they can, drop their friends or cheat on their wives or betray their colleagues and things like that. And they can still view themselves as a good guy because they've got this sort of higher mission. And so the fact to meet someone who was just generally a good guy was a little bit odd. But for a philosopher, it sort of makes sense to me that, if you have a philosophy that turns you into a sort of a bad human being, that ain't a good philosophy at all. I don't know where we're going, but wherever it is, being a decent human being has to be part of it. And I think that, more than anything else, is what really made me pay attention to what Robert Anton Wilson was writing, because the fact that he was so nice to his family, so he was such a loved person, ties in a lot with his philosophy and things like that, because he didn't do certain, he did maybe. As far as Bob was concerned, only the lunatic is certain. And that's a core part of his philosophy. And his philosophy is things like, reality tunnels. So there's an artist guy called Neil who's going to build a reality tunnel, so I better just give an excuse to define a reality tunnel, which is a concept Robert Anton Wilson got from Tim Leary. We all live in our own reality tunnels, but your reality tunnel is not reality. It's what you think reality is. It's the model of reality that you build in your own head over the course of your life. And that's a great thing, and it's useful, and you need models to be able to, understand the world and to predict what's going on. But a model is by definition a simplified and a smaller version of what it's supposed to represent. So they don't match one to one. So your reality tunnel and reality don't match in places. You never know what they are, but there's places they don't match. And in those places you're wrong. And he sort of accepted this, and he put it at the core of his philosophy, the thought that in times I'm wrong, and I've got to try and work out where I'm wrong so I can be less wrong. And it strikes me the way our culture is at the moment, with there's people stating definitive positions in 140 characters and just people digging in and being certain about things. And if more people understood where Bob Wilson was coming from, our culture would just be so much more fun, and far much more enjoyable. So I always had the fear that he might be forgotten, and I always had the fear that if people don't keep talking about him and sharing his books and things like that the world would be a worse place. And as a writer, the logical thing for me to do was to write about him. But I couldn't quite work out the best way to go about that. Because when I wrote about Tim Leary, for example, the guy escaped from jail. He was kidnapped by the Black Panthers in Algiers. Nixon's government called him the most dangerous man in America. There's drama there, because when I wrote about the KLF, they burned £1 million. It's inherently a sort of a dramatic sort of thing, and it can turn what could be a cod book about philosophy into a real yarn, a real page turner. And I couldn't think of a way to write about Bob's life that would be anywhere near as good as his own autobiographical books, the Cosmic Trigger series. So I thought, well, if I can't write about the man, maybe I can write about the ideas in some way, and how the ideas sort of express themselves in our culture, and what his impact was, and what his influence has been. So I started paying attention to his influence, and one thing shines really brightly if you do that, which was this production of a stage play of the Illuminatus trilogy, which is a book he co-wrote with Robert Shea, which Ken Campbell staged in Liverpool in 1977, which all the cast and crew are still trying to come to terms with, as far as I can tell, and which the fallout of which is still with us, and the fallout of which is here. So I will use this as a good example to pass to Daisy to continue.
That's very good. Yes, thank you, John. Fabulous. Yes, sorry, I am reading, but I read quite well, but my dad would kill me, the fact that I haven't learned this, so sorry, Dad, apologies. But yeah, I want to take you back to this moment that I experienced about 5 years ago. It was just a couple of weeks after my father, Ken Campbell's, sudden and untimely death, completely out of the blue. I was standing at the crossing point of a number of cobbled streets in Liverpool in the rain, and I was looking up at a bust of C.G. Jung. And that was kind of odd in itself, because right at that moment I was actually in the middle of writing an essay about Carl Jung for this master's degree that I was doing. But that wasn't why I was there. And I wasn't on my own. Stood with me was Prunella G, Chris Langham, and a guy called Peter O'Halligan. And we were all looking up at this bust of Carl Jung. It's there because Carl Jung had a dream about Liverpool, and in that dream he got the message that Liverpool represented the pool of life. And he thought it was one of the most important dreams that he'd ever had, in fact, and obviously he put a lot of store by dreams. So I'm writing this essay about Jung and his ideas of the collective unconscious and synchronicity, a phrase that he coined, I believe, and I'm looking at a bust of his head. And that bust has only been erected due to the tireless campaigning of this chap that I'm stood next to, Peter O'Halligan, because Peter O'Halligan believes that this spot is the exact spot of Jung's dream, even though Jung had never in fact been to Liverpool. And then to the side, the bust is kind of set into this building, and then a little further along on the same building is another unusual thing. It's a plaque, and it's to commemorate the Liverpool School of Language, Music, Dream and Pun. And that plaque is also only there due to the tireless campaigning of this chap, Peter O'Halloran, because when Peter first found this kind of illustrious Jung dream site, which of course he was led to through an endless web of synchronicities, etc., he found this spot and he noticed that on the corner of these cobbled streets was a derelict building. So he thought, well, clearly this is a sign, I've got to claim it. So he claimed it, he turned it into a kind of cafe, community centre type place. And he got on the phone to my dad to say, well, what are we going to stick on? And so the first thing that went on there was this production of Illuminatus. So directed by my dad and starring amongst many other people, my mother, Prunella G, as Eris, goddess of chaos and confusion, and co-adapted with Chris Langham from these novels by Robert Shea and Robert Anton Wilson. So there we all are, stood looking at this bust, and I say, you know, this is really weird, because right at this moment I'm in the middle of an essay about Jung. And then I kind of go, wait a minute, I'm doing a distance learning course, but in fact that course is based at John Moores University in Liverpool. At which point Peter O'Halloran says, oh yeah, your grandfather knew John Moores. In fact, John Moores went to your grandfather and said, do you want to get involved with this kind of business that he's got? And my paternal grandfather apparently said, no, not interested. It only turned out to be the football pools, right? So that's how come John Moores has got the money to build this university where I'm now studying Jung. And my head was beginning to spin at this moment. And then my mother said, and you do know you were conceived in that building? So I said, what? Wait a minute, surely you were all a bit busy staging this enormous theatrical epic, weren't you? And she said, well, you know, it was 18 hours long. There were some dull bits. So I'm standing on the spot where I was conceived, which is also the site of Jung's most important dream, looking at a bust of Jung whilst writing an essay about Jung at a university that was built with money that could have been mine were it not for the lack of business acumen of my paternal grandfather, where my mother played Eris, goddess of chaos and confusion, and my father staged an epic which was to change the lives irrevocably of everyone involved, and Eris became my middle name. And they say there's nothing to this synchronicity lot. So the kind of funny thing for me was that growing up I knew all about the legends surrounding Illuminatus and this production, but every time I sort of asked my dad, well, does he have a copy, can I have a read of it, he'd go a bit strange and cagey about it. So it wasn't until I was in my 20s, 23 to be exact, that I actually got round to reading Illuminatus finally, and it was like the experience of being initiated into a kind of magical order that almost everyone I knew was already an initiate of. It was bizarre. It was like I could suddenly speak the language of my tribe. You know, I could spot 23s with the best of them. I understood all about the ancient battle between the Illuminati and the Discordians. I understood why you can never trust any government, the true meaning of the eye and the pyramid symbol on every dollar bill, why communication is only possible between equals, why you should never whistle while you're pissing. And I began to see connections and synchronicities everywhere. In fact, life started to become too meaningful, and to cut a long story short, I flipped out and I found myself in a loony bin somewhere in Kent with rainbow knickers on my head for cosmic reasons, which I forget. Anyway, so that the following morning, the nutters all gathered to sort of see, you know, what new inmates the night had blown in, and I said to them, well, synchronicity has led me here. And I was so completely trusting in all these signs and symbols that just seem to be everywhere now that, you know, someone said to me, well, you know, really, why are you here? I said, the answer is in that magazine that you are holding. And she was clutching Soap Opera magazine, this girl, and she said, okay then, and she handed it over to me. And I just let it fall open where it would, and it fell open at this double-page spread where it said in enormous pink letters, Daisy must lose some of her passion. And that's what Daisy did. And, you know, honestly, 10 years later, I really thought that Eris was back in her little box. But it was not to be. The doors of Chapel Perilous were beginning to to shake once more. So this is kind of the wonderful thing about this book, Illuminatus. Also, kind of possibly the worrying thing is that many people I meet who have read and loved that book have got quite a similar story to tell. Some are a bit more extreme, some less so, but they're, bizarre synchronicities are pretty much standard. And there are often tales of some kind of spiritual emergency or that's what Stanislav Grof would call it, or temporary psychosis, as the rest of the medical establishment would have it. So these are the experiences that the Robert Anton Wilson, in his more autobiographical book Cosmic Trigger, refers to as a journey through Chapel Perilous. So this is a dangerous crossing point brought on usually, but not always, through researching the occult. And from which, according to Wilson, one can only emerge either paranoid or agnostic. And by agnostic, he doesn't mean just not believing or not knowing whether or not to believe in God, but not knowing whether or not to believe in anything. He was really calling for true agnosticism, which puts me in mind of this thing my dad always used to say to me. He said, "Now listen, Daisy, don't believe anything, right? Nothing which is the product of the human mind is a fitting subject for your belief. But you can suppose anything. And in fact you should, because supposing is good. Supposing is mind expanding. Believing is mind contracting." He said, so look, you can believe in God if you must, believe in flying saucers, believe in fairies. Sorry, not believe. He said, suppose in God, suppose in flying saucers, suppose in fairies. He said to me, I suppose you could suppose that one of the big religions had actually got it right down to the last nut and bolt. But Daisy, don't believe it. And as Wilson succinctly puts this stance, convictions cause convicts. And with that, I shall pass you back to John.
So going back to this production of Illuminatus in Liverpool in 1977, the stage manager was a guy called Bill Drummond, the ever fascinating Bill Drummond. He wasn't stage manager for long. He said he was going to have some glue and never return, but for the start of it he was stage manager. And something about the story of Illuminatus and also Ken Campbell's influence clearly stuck with him. And 10 years later he phoned up Jimmy Corti, who I think lives out Port Sladeway now, and said, let's form a band called the Justified Ancients of Moo. And Jimmy Corti was the perfect person to say that to. A name like Justified Ancients of Moo, now to our ears sounds a strange name for a band. In the 80s it was a really strange name for a band. You didn't have words like ancient and justified in pop music. It was clearly coming from some other place. And the place it was coming from was, of course, the Illuminatus trilogy. In the book, the Justified Ancients of Moo, or the Jams, were originally part of the Illuminati, but they were kicked out and they became like a Discordian splinter terrorist cell, and they were particularly at war with the music industry because the Illuminati, the forces of order, controlled the controlled the music industry, and they were slipping anti-Jams propaganda into records such as the MC5 record Kick Out the Jams, which has that big shout from John Sinclair at the start and things like that. That was the story. So Bill Drummond and Jimmy Corti decide to take on the mantle. They're going to take on that name. They're going to be the forces of discord at war with the music industry. And it's at the time when samplers are just starting to appear. So they just start taking huge chunks of Beatles and huge chunks of ABBA and just using them how they will in a more of a situationist approach rather than how sampling is sort of done these days. And being good Discordians, they kept changing their name. The most famous one being the KLF. When they became the KLF, they became great. And when they became great, they became big. And they were the biggest selling singles band in the entire world in 1991. They got the Brits for the best band. They were, just a couple of months ago, they were named the second best band of all time after the Beatles. By the Times. 2 months ago. But if you're supposed to be at war with the force of order that are the music industry, you've gone wrong at that point, clearly. They recognised that. And they immediately split up. And they immediately deleted all their back catalogue, which is why you don't hear their stuff anymore. You don't hear it on film soundtracks or video game soundtracks or Ministry of Sound compilations. To disappear from musical history. And they got all their money that they'd made, and they flew up to the Hebrides. And on the night of August 23rd, 1994, they went to a deserted boathouse on the Isle of Jura with all that money, which was £1 million, and they set fire to the lot. And a lot of people were very angry about that, as you can understand. And they would say, well, why? Was it an art thing? Was it a prank? Was it a promotional thing? Was it a political sort of thing? And none of those explanations really make any sense if you look at it. It was just a compulsion. It was a compulsion so strong that they had to act on it. And starting to burn £1 million is one thing. Finishing is completely a different sort of thing. But from my point of view, hey, this was great. This was a dramatic thing that I could weave a book about Robert Anton Wilson around. But the problem was, they had no idea why they did it. If you look at all the interviews when they talk about it, they genuinely can't explain it. And when I met Robert Anton Wilson, I asked him about the KLF, and I asked him about the money burning. And I thought he's going to have a great take on this, because it comes from his influence and it's such an important thing. And he said, I've never heard of them. And it slowly became apparent that what I was looking at was a story of which none of the characters knew what the story was. If I got far enough back, and if I put Robert Anton Wilson there, and I put Bill Drummond there, and I put Ken Campbell there, I put a lot of Alan Moore in, and the magic ingredient, surprisingly, for the 5th part, for the Lord of the Fives, was Doctor Who. Once I slotted Doctor Who into this thing and stood back, there was a complete story there. And I wrote the story, and then I picked it up and I read it back through, and all the parts in it were true. Everything was factual, but the story itself was going to get me sectioned. I can't possibly, show people this. And yet, no one was talking about Robert Anton Wilson, and nobody cared about the KLF, or so it seemed. I was really going to put it in a drawer, but a few people said no. And in fact, Jason Arnott at the back there, in particular, was pointing out first, no, you must put it out. So I just slipped it out on Kindle, just put it as an ebook on Kindle, and sent a few tweets and sat back just to sort of see what the reaction would be, so I could sort of, pretend it never happened if need be. And it turned out I was completely wrong. There were a lot of people who really wanted to put a frame around this whole period, this whole Discordian current. And the thing started snowballing, and then I got a great agent, and then I got book deals, and it all came great personally. And we chose Orion to put out the actual physical paperback for many reasons, but what pleased me in particular was their paperback imprint is called Phoenix. So the story of a fire, which I took to a Kindle and became a phoenix, and that's what the transformational thing seems to be what sort of happened to my life. And of course the publisher going, we need photos of the book, go get a load of photos. And that led me to meeting Prunella G, who, as Daisy said, was the actress who played the goddess Eris in this Illuminatis, and getting photos from her. And it was quite exciting to do that, because she's a Bond girl, but she's in the in that comeback Connery one, Never Say Never Again, which isn't sort of a Bond film. So it seems very fitting that the goddess Eris is a Bond girl, but sort of isn't a Bond girl at the same time. So I was talking to her, and I was telling her, about myself and why I really wanted to sort of, keep the flame of Robert Anton Wilson alive, keep the lasagna flying, and so forth. And she goes, you have to go and kick my daughter. And when Eris tells you to go kick her daughter, that's as far as I see. So we'll pass back to Daisy.
Oh, thank you very much. Right, yeah. So I'm in this loony bin somewhere in Kent with rainbow knickers on my head, which I said was for cosmic reasons, which I forget. Actually, I did know what I was doing. I was attempting to regulate the flow of pronoid synchronicities that I was experiencing. I wasn't paranoid, I was pronoid. I had the creeping sensation that everyone everywhere was out to help me. So hence the rainbow knickers. I believe that paranoids favour tinfoil for this kind of similar protective thing, but I was paranoid, so of course it had to be rainbow knickers. And I would know from moment to moment if Eris was required to respond or if it was Daisy this moment, because either there'd be a flower motif would suddenly be there, and it's Daisy time, and no, it's an apple, oh, it's Eris time, okay. So I'd become kind of, in the words of Hacking Bay, a pirate for all signs and meanings. And there I was, and I was holding forth one day, and I was telling everyone about my dad's notions of artist's choice. Do you know this one? It goes this. Choice 1. You can distract, entertain and deceive about the true nature of things and thus help to sustain the status quo. That's choice 1 as an artist. Choice 2. You can pose as exposing wrongs, but in fact deceive and therefore sustain the status quo. Choice 3, you can expose wrongs and bring about change. Unfortunately, this choice is not possible, because if you really know what's going on, you have to sign a thing to say that you won't tell anyone. But, said my dad, perhaps a 4th choice is possible. To pose as exposing wrongs, but in fact deceive, but with a willful mix of truth and lie, research and fantasy, so inscrutably compounded as to send the status quo hunting for needles that nobody's lost in haystacks that don't exist, diverting attention from the ensuing release of hitherto imprisoned forces, which will bring about change, but of an unpredictable nature. As my dad always said, it's the caper what counts. And there's this sort of surly guy stood there, at the back of the crowd, and he's scowling at me, and he's not at all keen on this rainbow knickered person who's turned up at all. And he said to me, "So how long have you been stuck up your father's arsehole?" And I said, I don't know. So anyway, it's 10 years since I was in the plush loony bin, reading Daisy Must Lose Some of Her Passion, and it's 5 years since I was standing looking at the bust of Carl Jung, and Eris is well stuffed back in her box. And then I get a phone call from someone asking, could we meet to discuss the possibility of staging Illuminatus? And I remembered my dad's worried face anytime anyone ever mooted that possibility, and I remember the rainbow knickers, and I remember that, I'm not my dad, I don't have to put on all his shows, So I decline. But then that same week, I get another phone call from someone completely unrelated to the first person, asking, would it be possible to meet to discuss the possibility of staging Illuminatus? And I thought, oh shit, Illuminatus-related synchronicities are back, and I'm not sure I'm going to be able to outrun them this time. So anyway, I knew I didn't want to do Illuminatus again. It felt like it was backward looking, but I thought, okay, so what's the logical next step in this whole jigsaw puzzle? And I thought, well, the book that Robert Anton Wilson wrote after Illuminatus was Cosmic Trigger, which is a non-fiction book that he felt compelled to write as a result of what happened to him after writing Illuminatus. And when you consider what happened to me simply as a result of reading it, you can begin to imagine some of the kind of strangeness that this book, Cosmic Trigger, contains. And then I realised, wait a minute, this book, Cosmic Trigger, was born as a direct result of Illuminatus. And so was I. So in some strange way, this book and I are kind of siblings. Anyway, I picked up my old battered copy of Cosmic Trigger, and I'm reminded that it is actually dedicated to my dad and the Science Fiction Theatre of Liverpool. And on page 223, interestingly also the same page in Jung's Memories, Dreams and Reflections that he writes about Liverpool, Wilson talks about coming over to London, meeting my dad, being involved in the in Illuminatus when it transferred and opened the Cottesloe Theatre at the National, and appearing as a cameo completely stark naked in the Black Mass scene. And this seemed to be quite a significant moment for him in his life, which means from my point of view my dad could have a part in it. So that's what I decided to do. I decided that I would get to work on an adaptation of Cosmic Trigger. If you don't know Cosmic Trigger, it's a real great, fascinating book. It sort of details what happened to Wilson when he starts to get heavily involved in the teachings of Aleister Crowley, takes a lot of acid, cooks up plans for immortality and space migration with his pal Timothy Leary, helps found the Church of Discordia, which worships Eris, goddess of chaos and confusion. Discord, international relations are also her remit, I believe. Before finding that he has stumbled upon a 6,500-year-old telepathic dialogue with the dog star Sirius. It's fantastic stuff. Anyway, but I was writing the first draft, I started floundering about, and I started to wonder if all this was a bit daft for kind of modern sophisticates, and if really, was there any audience for Robert Anton Wilson related theatre anymore? And at that moment I was really, the doubt was on me. I thought, oh man, I don't know if I can do this. I got a phone call from my mum and she said, listen, I've just met this guy called John Higgs. You've got to meet him. He lives in Brighton. His kids are the same age as yours. You both go on holiday in North Wales. You're cosmic twins. So I phoned him immediately and we met up the next day and he said, yes, there is an audience for Robert Anton Wilson related. I thought the same thing, but there is. And so he invited me. I mean, at this point I'd literally just written the first draft, had a read through of that with some mates, and he invited me to come and talk at this gig that he was doing at the Horse Hospital in London. So I sort of turned up feeling it was a rather early days to be announcing my intentions, but I did so, and that talk just sparked an avalanche of offers of help. An entire production team of the highest calibre came out of the woodwork, has formed around this project. And I mean, it's just been a kind of extraordinary, snowballing, wonderful thing that I'm now just sort of hanging on for the ride, to be honest. Another thing that happened at that Horse Hospital talk was that this woman came up to me at the end of it and she was saying, I love you, God damn. And I thought, she's starstruck, which, I mean, that was a novelty in itself. I've never had anyone be starstruck coming to talk to me. She couldn't get her words out at all, so I sort of had to move on and talk to other people who were wanting to have a chat. But I felt rather rude, and I thought she might have had something quite important to tell me, that woman. So I hoped that she'd stuck her name down on the mailing list, and so when I sent out my next big email, I just said at the bottom, if you were the woman who I rather rudely moved on from, do get in touch. And she did, and she said, the thing is, I'm the expert on your dad's relationship with the Arts Council. I said, fine. Didn't know they were one of them. Right, brilliant. And she said, no, but it's really funny stuff, and you should, if you don't know it, you should come and have a look. It's all in the V&A archive in London. And so she got me in for this very bureaucratic adventure of signing in and going through gates and stickers and all the rest of it. And we sat down to look at this stuff from the V&A Theatre Archive. The first thing I found in it was this postcard. I don't know how well you can see that. Oh, bollocks, it's gone completely. And it's a sort of dirty seaside postcard. You've got a kind of fortune teller here, know the future, £2, and then a rather lovely looking buxom lady saying, enjoy the present, £3. You'll notice as well the 23 that's tucked in there. And when you look at the back, what that turned out to be was my dad's Arts Council application. he said on the back, anyway, it's all marvellous up here in Liverpool, total magic happening. Next year, earmark about 50,000. And then the next thing I discovered in this archive was the proposed project of the Science Fiction Theatre of Liverpool. And in that list of various projects they were planning to do was what they were calling Illuminatus 2, which would be based on the latest revelations as related in the recently published Cosmic Trigger. I had no idea. So I started to feel, oh shit, this is kind of meant to be, isn't it? And then also in the archive, there was this pleading note from a sort of, I think it was an Arts Council member or a theatre manager or something, saying to Ken, would he please consider opening the play on Friday the 27th of November rather than Monday the 23rd of November, and he's just simply sent it back, scrawled over the top, no, must open 23rd or will not do it. And as some of you here will know, November 23rd is a Discordian holy day and also Harpo Marx's birthday. So I now knew the day of the year that we would open Cosmic Trigger as well. But I kept talking to all these kind of professional theatre types, and they were saying, well, there's no chance you're going to be doing it this November. No, the theatres, they were planning far too ahead for that. And I thought, oh, well, all right, would be sensible, we'll work on doing it for the following year. And then my mum phoned me again, and she said, I've just worked out that you're exactly the same age that your dad was when he put on Illuminatus. And I thought, oh, right, fuck, okay, is this year then? Okay. Right. So we took the whole company to Liverpool. It seemed the obvious place to go to see if they might fancy us pulling the Cosmic Trigger on November 23rd there once again. And they said, yeah, we do. They really kind of came out in force. We ended up, because there was so many people wanting to get involved, staging Bob's first acid trip, this incredibly complex scene with projections and an enormous typewriter that eats Wilson at one point that someone fashioned out of a sofa with a few hours notice. And I mean, it was great fun. And then after that, we paraded down to the Jung bust, of course, and taking the entire audience with us, about 200 of us, all parading down through Liverpool's sort of most busy quarter. And there I was hoiked up by a whole crowd of men of a certain age who should have probably known better. And I placed rainbow knickers on Jung's head as cosmic protection for Discordians everywhere. And with a cry of, may our minds be blown just right. And with that, we'll take a little break, shall we? And
yes,
yeah.
Excellent. Okay, let's get started again. I'll hand back to these guys.
Fantastic. Can you see me better if I sit, in fact, because of the light? People, yeah?
Yeah, better light.
Better. Right, okay, so the...
Surprisingly,
what's
not
going on
usable
here?
to
liking
find.
the tinfoil hats.
Hey, there's your rainbow knickers!
Exactly. We're in fucking Chinatown,
It's paranoids in here.
I only just
I was
realised
thinking
that
this
when
room's
Joe
quite
pointed
like
that out.
chapel paradise. It's quite, here we all are gathered in chapel paradise.
We've gone a bit harder core on the plan before we could have done it.
Yeah, it'd be so easy.
Rainbows the other way.
Brilliant. Shall I get going then? Are you happy with me sitting? Yeah? Cool. Okay, so I've written the second draft now, and I think it's quite good. The feedback's pretty good about it. It's with Wilson and Shay's families, so fingers crossed that they're going to really love it. And then Alan Moore's agreed to come on board as Fuck Up, the world's most intelligent computer. So he's already recorded his lines, which is fantastic. So John and I went to interview him. Fucking hell, he can hold forth. 5.5 hours. We caught a little bit of it on camera, so that will all be part of our kind of crowdfund thing that's coming up. And then Jamie Reid came along to Liverpool of Never Mind the Bollocks and Anarchy in the UK album cover fame, and said, yeah, you can raid anything from my entire art collection and make use of it for the show. Wow. So I mean, this is what keeps happening. I'm like, fuck. So we've decided that we're staging it on the yes and principle, and the whole yes and thing comes from when my dad was working at the Royal Court, and he was surrounded by all these kind of new wave playwrights, and he couldn't help noticing that as these playwrights drank, they got more and more sort of depressive and maudlin, and everything became, oh no, but you see the stage has done this, and you can't really put on any great, no but. And then, for one reason or another, he actually got invited by Brian Aldiss, the science fiction author, to his first science fiction convention. And he turned up there and he noted that when the science fiction lot got more and more pissed, they became more and more positive about everything. And say, oh, the colonisation of Mars, oh yes, and imagine that the whole water supply is running, oh yes, and all night sort of building these great kind of castles of yes and ideas. And to me, that's what Illuminatus feels like as a novel. It's like the ultimate yes and novel, especially since it was co-written by Wilson and his best mate Bob Shea while they had this really cushy job at Playboy magazine. And you can sort of hear them saying, so should the rebels all live on a yellow submarine? Yes. And should they be able to talk to dolphins? Yes. And they can that can be achieved by having the world's most advanced computer. Yes. And they'll go to Atlantis. Yes. But the Illuminati will have got there first. And yes and yes and. But it's quite difficult writing about yes and people because they kind of, it's a tricky one to find the narrative in Cosmic Trigger in some ways. So adapting it has certainly been something of a challenge. So the way I've kind of done it is I'm telling as the central thrust the story of Wilson's journey into and out of Chapel Perilous as he gets more and more into doing Aleister Crowley experiments and taking LSD. Which in my particular telling was actually given to him by Timothy Leary himself. And, Crowley was a massive influence on Wilson, actually. And what he liked, I think, Wilson liked, was that Crowley was always telling his followers not to believe anything that he said, but to look into everything for themselves. So Wilson began to follow some of the exercises as suggested by Crowley, and he found that his consciousness did begin to change. One of the examples that I love that I've put in the adaptation is when Wilson undertook to ban himself completely from using the word I. So Crowley really encouraged negative reinforcement, and so when Crowley had done it, he'd slashed himself with a razor every time he slipped and used the word I. Wilson felt this was a little bit extreme for him, so instead, whenever he slipped and said the word I, he'd bite himself on the thumb really hard. It's not quite the same effect, but it's kind of rather sweet interpretation, I thought. And so he said at the end of 2 weeks he had a severely bruised thumb, but from then on he could only see the concept of I as a convenient fiction. Wilson also noted that most people have this kind of horror reaction to Crowley's most famous maxim, do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. And yet, as Wilson pointed out, we have embraced to our hearts repeatedly gurus who tell us do what they wilt shall be the whole of the law. Wilson defined a disciple as an arsehole looking for a human being to attach itself to. So anyway, then the adaptation, it follows Wilson's involvement as he founds the Church of Discordia with Greg Hill and Kerry Thornley and begins work on Illuminatus. But then the way I've done it is that when they begin work on Illuminatus, they start to become the characters in Illuminatus, and then before we know it, we're actually into a scene from the original Illuminatus production, at which point whose voice should ring out from the stalls, but my dad saying, all right, hold it there, guys, and we realise we're actually backstage in Liverpool with all the shenanigans going on there. So that's kind of the approach I've taken to the whole thing. And over to John.
Very good. Well, you think that would be enough to put on a play, but that doesn't seem to be quite enough. So there's going to be a festival, a 3-day Cosmic Trigger festival around the premiere up in Liverpool, with a whole bunch of workshops and talkers and bands and acts and comedians that are linked to Cosmic Trigger, that are linked to Robert Anton Wilson in some sort of way. And certainly in this past few months I've become aware of how the themes of Cosmic Trigger apply especially to creative types, because Cosmic Trigger is about Robert Anton Wilson's the spiritual emergency, the point he reached where all the maps ran out and he had no way of making sense of what was happening to him. And I've met a lot of writers and musicians who've also had a similar either spiritual emergency on one hand or some form of Gnostic sort of revelation on the other hand. And they then have to process that. And there's no way in our culture to really process something that overwhelming and strange that happens to you. You can't just go down to church and tell the vicar he'd shit himself, If you had to tell Richard Dawkins or Professor Brown Cox, something like that, they'd just insult you, they'd just hate you. But you need to process these things, and the only way that it seems possible, that I can see, is to create something with it, create a painting or a theatre production or a book or an act or in some way. And an awful lot of the bands or the people that we're speaking to for this festival have had a similar sort of experience where they've been in that sort of spiritual sort of desolation and had to try and produce something with it. And it's great because you get something out of it, something valuable and worthwhile. And to me, this fits a lot of the themes of the book and the mythology. Daisy was talking about Carl Jung's dream of Liverpool. And in that dream, he saw a tree, a magnolia tree, that seemed to be bathed in light, but at the same time, it was the source of light. It was like a fountain of the life force, he said. It was essentially meaning. It was an eruption of a meaning, not defined, but just reassured that meaning existed. And this, to me, reminds me of the central metaphor in Cosmic Trigger. Now, it's a lot more brutal in Cosmic Trigger, it's a lot more American. It's a gun, it's about firing a gun. But once you fire that gun, it unleashes a tsunami of meaning that you then have to make sense of because you pull the trigger. And there's a bit in one of my books, I can't remember which one it is, which is a bit embarrassing, but in one of my books, someone gets a page from a Bible in the future for various reasons. And it reads, if you apply meaning to what you're doing, you have art. If you apply meaning to people, you have love. If you apply meaning to everything, you have God. Meaning is free. There's an inexhaustible supply of meaning. So what's your fucking problem? And the problem is, of course, that meaning's not a fixed, static thing. It sort of ebbs and flows like the tide. There are times when you're just bathed in it, and everything is self-evidently worthwhile and interesting and great. And there are times when the tide goes out, and you have the horrors, the existential horrors. And it's at that point that the image in Jung's dream of a source of meaning is so important, just to reassure them that that meaning does exist. It doesn't define what that meaning is, it just tells you that meaning exists. And when Robert Anton Wilson went through Chapel Perilous, when he had his tsunami of meaning, when he pulled his cosmic trigger, that all became coloured by a mythology that sprung up around it about 23s and invisible giant rabbits and aliens from Sirius and Crowley and all this sort of great stuff, and it's all in the book and it's all in the play and it's all great. But Robert Anton Wilson would never for 1 minute think that would be what you would get if you went through a similar sort of experience. And he was also wise enough to realise that that in no way belittled the experience, the fact that someone else has something different to you, because your own personal meaning will be the most rewarding and entertaining and fun and comforting and useful philosophy that you ever come across in your entire life. And that to me is the message of Cosmic Trigger, and that what this sort of festival is sort of all about. And here's Daisy with the weather.
Oh, I love that. Wow, yeah. What's your cosmic trigger? And how might you pull it? Yes, so I sort of started to turn my attention how I might fund this bugger, especially since Arts Council applications are no longer accepted on the back of dirty postcards. And I was pondering over this, and my partner said to me, well, isn't the clue of how to fund it contained within the last scene? And the last scene is Wilson's home, 2007. He's an old man now. A letter plops through the letterbox. He slowly manoeuvres himself to pick it up. He says, in 1970, excuse the terrible accent, in 1975, I lost the ability to know when something was about to come through the door. It wasn't that useful a skill anyway. It's a check for $23. How funny. And another letter plops through the letterbox. He opens it. It's another check for $23. And another one. And another. Okay, there's something fishy going on here. Time to consult the oracle. He reaches for his laptop. Type in Robert Anton Wilson, $23. And magic. Okay, guys, time to support cosmic thinking patriarch Robert Anton Wilson, whose infirmity and depleted finances have put him in the precarious position of not being able to meet next month's rent or his medical costs. His last wish is to die in his home, but he cannot afford this option. Robert Anton Wilson will one day be remembered alongside such literary philosophers as Aldous Huxley and James Joyce. I don't know about that. But right now, Bob is in a rather painful flesh suit and he needs our help. I refuse for the history books to say that he died alone and destitute, and I want future generations to know that we appreciated Robert Anton Wilson while he was alive. If Bob Wilson changed your life, send him $23 now. And another envelope plops in through the door, followed immediately by another and another. They are clogging in the letterbox. And then the whole door starts to strain and eventually bursts open, coming off its hinges. An avalanche pours into the room. And Bob, all white long beard and twinkly eyes, stares in delighted disbelief. So that's the last scene of the play. So yeah, that's the clue. The final clue that I needed, how to fund it. $23, £23. We're going to set up a crowd fund. There's going to be all sorts of fantastic perks. The Alan Moore interview that we did will be available. Never available before footage of my dad's one-man shows. An interview that Bob Shea and Wilson did backstage at the National Theatre that nobody's ever heard, that's appeared from the archive. That'll be available. So check it out. It's going to launch on May 23rd. And I'll make sure there's a piece of paper here so you can all stick your emails on if you want to be kept posted of how this whole project unfolds. So yeah, help us, resurrect the ideas of Robert Anton Wilson into a world that needs to speciate out of its current stupidity. As Wilson used to say, think how stupid the average person is. Well, statistically, half of them are even stupider than that. There's a line actually that comes up a few times in my adaptation. Yesterday they called it coincidence. Today they call it synchronicity. Tomorrow they will call it skill. Let's suppose that when these moments of synchronicity occur, they are leading us to some kind of universal language, but we're just like toddlers. We're only just learning to speak, and so it's like, imagine that when toddlers are first sort of immersed in the adult language, of the adults around them, they kind of, it's all gobbledygook, oh, might go to the zoo, oh, they pick up little bits that might be important to them. And synchronicities, they kind of have that same feeling. It's like they clue us in to this meaning that John's talking about, these clues that there maybe is a greater meaning there. And it's also rather like the experience of reading Illuminatus, as Wilson said, my books are like mirrors. If a monkey looks in, no philosopher looks out. So the night before the horse hospital talk, I actually had a dream, and I was standing at the crossing point of these cobbled streets. I was in Liverpool and it's raining, and it was a few hours after the first performance of Cosmic Trigger. And all around me are these wonderful Discordian faces, and we're all saying, God, didn't the whole Discordian initiation scene go well with fucking the enormous inflatable golden apple? Yes, and wasn't it great when the eye in the pyramid projection rose up and the Illuminati all came out singing? Yes, and how wasn't it funny when the Syrians all turned up in the toilet block in the interval? Yes, and what about Bob's daughter turning up and doing a cameo in the Black Mass scene? Yes, and then we all look at the bust of Carl Jung to give thanks for the forces of synchronicity that have got us to this point, and we realise that Carl Jung has an enormous pair of rainbow knickers on his head. And then his big stone lips open, and he says, it was after I had the dream of Liverpool that I knew I was finally out of Freud's asshole. So now I understand. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, guys.
Pleasure. Thanks so much for coming. Yeah.
So exciting and real, rip roaring yarn of a thing as well, and I'm just really I've enjoyed it right now. Does anyone have a question they want to ask?
I've got a question. I was wondering about when you were talking about the KF earlier on, when they burned with money, and there was this idea that maybe it was unclear what they were trying to do with it, and it made me think of the Chill Out album that they produced, which had samples of kind of Elvis in it, and it made me think that maybe there's like an in-between that they're trying to explore, where maybe on one hand you have the KLF, basically, and on the other hand you have like very recognisable forms of music or art or something, and maybe with the burning of money, on one hand you have the KLF, and on the other hand you have the burning of money, but maybe there's like an in-between that they're trying to explore there. Like, is there something that you think that we're not getting?
Well, I mean, there was certainly exploring in-betweens. One's the buggers for liminal states, definitely, and Bill Drummond loves his maps and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
But what I think is interesting is the burning of the money. After they split up and they stopped being the KLF, they became the K Foundation. And there's no other example of a band that have split up and stopped making music but continued to work together in a different aspect that I can think of, unless anyone knows of any. It's almost like the music wasn't their main purpose, you know. It was like there was some higher calling there, which music just happened to sort of suit and fit. And it does seem to be a continuation, you know, into the K Foundation and the money burning and things like that. As for your point about the Elvis things, it's you could ask Bill Drummond that and you wouldn't get an answer. I don't know. It's the best I can do.
I wouldn't expect an answer to that specific.
Yeah.
Specific.
No. I mean, well, I really like the fact that he's quite open about they didn't know what they were really doing, but he just, when he felt drawn to something, he was clearly drawn to something, and he was wise enough not to listen to that little voice in his head that says when a project starts, when an idea starts forming, there's the voice of critics in your little head that goes, well, that's no good, no one's interested in that, that's rubbish, doesn't make any sense at all, that's just illogical. If you ignore that, then the thing will become something. And then you can listen to those voices, you know. But you have to not listen to them at the start, or she'll not do anything at all. Obviously, if it leads you to burning £1 million, then maybe you should listen. I don't know.
Well, if I was in the position to burn £1 million, I probably would too, but I haven't sampled Elvis yet, so I guess I won't.
No, if you sampled Elvis, your court case costs alone would be £1 million.
It'd be more discordian for them to burn it, for them to be in the music industry in the first place, for them to take the money and do something with it. It was more capitalistic.
Yeah. Well, that's a strange thing, I guess. None of us in this room are really in a position to make that kind of statement, are we?
As in burning them in the career.
But it's also it's like also getting rid of the back catalogue.
Yeah. 23 quid each.
Let's go.
Deleting the back. The estimates of what they lost by deleting their back catalogue are about 5 million.
Yeah.
Selfish
You know,
bastard.
that was the real sort of, you know, that's the real sort of hard thing to, you know, explain to their kids.
Does anyone else
serious.
have the experience with money that as soon as you start to respect it, it seems to fall out of your hands, whereas if you treat it like confetti, it seems to come to you.
I'll bear that one in mind.
That must be
That's the sort of theory that they were going on at the time, because when I just throw it around like confetti, it seems to feed me and keep me sheltered. As soon as you respect it and try to hoard it, that's when it turns nasty and evil. And after it all, it is pictures of the Queen at the end.
To me, it seems like it's a clinging thing, isn't it? Like, I don't know, if like,
Please, Mother, nourish us.
anything that you cling to tends to, you know, wrench itself out of your grasp, doesn't it? Like, clinging's a destructive, nasty, but very understandable instinct.
Well, it solidifies something, doesn't it? So it's no longer fluid, and therefore
I think there's two ways of the money thing. Is like the only way you can stand up and actually have a leg to stand on if you want to talk about life and politics is if you are genuinely self-sufficient and you step out of that money, because all of that money's got blood on it. or
Yeah.
you just treat it with total disrespect.
What is a good
Respect
way
it,
of earning
and that's
that
another
money?
way of doing it. But
Is there
as
a
soon
good
as you
way?
start to respect the stuff, then forget it. You ain't got a leg to stand on.
Yeah, before they burnt the money, when they're trying to work out what to do, there was a period where they started nailing it to wood. They take off some money, nail it to wood. It was all about trying to control the damn thing. When me and Daisy did a talk in London, and it just happened to be the one day of the year that this guy, Jonathan Harris, burns 20 quid himself, which is a habit he got into when he was bankrupt. But on that day, and so he came along and he did it. He did it for the whole room, and there was a weird atmosphere when he was sort of burning. Really affected people. It was just 20 quid. You know, it's London, so 20 quid is around. I lost 20 quid earlier, you know. But he describes it as a act of forgiveness, of sacrifice, of giving with no expectation of return. Right, burning money is just giving with no expectation. It's a weird way of looking at it, but I kind of like that a lot.
Same as the roundabout kindness thing.
There were two of our friends then.
Oh yeah.
And you know, when that 20 quid got burnt on stage, and they were laughing their heads off because it's funny, and someone like shouted at them saying, "Have some respect."
Someone was saying, "What about Syria?" Like 20 quid was going to solve Syria. Mad, yeah.
Do you think, like, in that act, so like someone's burning 20 quid, and suddenly, because of the history of what that represents and things, people are like suddenly serious about another value form, which is art, which is something that people like put far too much capital value in anyway, and so there's this kind of weird triangulation of rubbish, which is interesting because it's like suddenly, oh, you're suddenly really valuable and special because you're doing this thing, and it's like, well, actually you're expressing the complete opposite. It's kind of a selfless act of like annihilation, and
Yeah, so-
you know, I think that's kind of interesting because people start to take it really seriously, even if they're taking seriously the fact that it's stupid and funny and reckless, and like I find that interesting because it's like people are scared of it even if they really don't want to.
But it really reveals your reality tunnel as well, money like nothing else. And I think, you know, Wilson got into the habit of referring to it as bio-survival tickets, which I think he got from Leary, hadn't he?
Yeah.
But this idea that, you know, without money you're born into the tribe that looks after you from birth to death. That's your bio-survival right there, the people around you. And now what we've done is replaced our bio-survival with pieces of paper. They are bio-survival tickets, and it kind of helps to sort of see where your reality tunnel's at, really, I think. And the burning of it is saying I accept it as no such thing.
I find it funny as well, because there's like, even within like the text and the form and the material of like a say £5 or something, it's not even the money itself, it's like promise to pay the bearer on demand the sum of. And it equates to some like invisible gold banks.
If everyone took them in, they wouldn't be able to do it, would they?
No, because most people will hear about the burning and get angry, and the automatic assumption is, well, I would have had it. If they didn't want it, I would have. You have to sort of realise that, hey, they were never going to give you £1 million. They were never going to give it to you. And it also is the case that they, you know, sure they do stuff for charity and things like that, but they were never going to give this money sort of to charity. Whereas so many in the book I talk about Elton John and how many millions he spent on flowers, which I nearly put in quotes because I think, you know, we all know more flowers. But I just had to write flowers in the book, unfortunately. And no one cares about that. Oh, Elton John's pissed away $5 million. Because the money keeps circling. It goes to the florists. It goes to, you know, it stays in the system. The system sort of works. Negating it, burning it, denying it, that's just offensive to a lot of people. That's sort of a weird, interesting thing.
But I had an exchange with Bill Drummond just recently, so I was trying to get him to donate something towards the crowdfund, not money, something that we could then, you know, offer through the crowdfund. And he was saying, I may do, but it will be anonymous, you'll never know that it came from me, blah, 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 and this and that. And he said, now listen, don't forget all about all this. The only thing that's important is the thing itself. And it really kind of hit me here, the thing itself. Yeah, you can get so drawn into, the fundraising and all the things and the way we're going to market it. And you're just like, no. The thing itself, and it just after that I started to wonder the getting rid of the back catalogue, the money that had come from it. Fuck all that. Look at the thing itself, you know. That's just the peripheries in a way. So
those records are great.
They were great, weren't they? They were lots of
they're
great.
perfectly
really
formed.
Interesting about the records being great,
Yeah.
and because I think they mastered that dubious world of the music industry. They overcame that. Basically, if you want to see it as an Illuminati construct, I would say right. But I think that the precursors to the burning of the £1 million, plus their activities afterwards, was really telling, because they, as you recall, they nailed the money, they exhibited that, and the art world, in my perspective, proved to be a far more formidable organisation, a far more mercurial establishment than the music industry was. And it's a structure of far more sophisticated dishonesty than the music industry. And I think that they failed in going up against it. And I think that is, for me, and it's just for me, that's a key to understanding their confusion, because we're in the music industry, they succeeded, they triumphed, absolutely, masterfully. Against the art world, they failed.
Well, I talked a lot to a friend of mine who ran a gallery in London about this thing, and as he explained it to me, the art world is such a self-policing thing that there's no way anyone who doesn't start out as an artist can be accepted as an artist. You can't go off and do a thing and have a career and then come back and be an artist. You have to come out of the right art schools and you have to have that right level of dedication, and there can't be any question marks about you. And as a gallery owner, he knew that if he ran an exhibition from your man from the Rolling Stones or Paul McCartney or something like that, they'd get footfall, so they'd sort of do it, but there was no sense in the art world that this counted. You know, this was just like novelty records in the music industry. This wasn't the real thing. So what I'm really pleased about is there's so much love for Bill Drummond at the moment. He's been for the past 20 years. He's been doing his own particular type of art, which is just baking cakes and writing signs and making beds and things like that. And he's gone to he's in Birmingham at the moment doing it, and there's just been this huge outpouring of delight about it. And a recognition of, it's Bill Drummond. He's true to the trail, he's one of the good ones. And he seems to be being recognised. I don't know if it's by the art world, but it's by the wider world as one of the greats.
Because he did am I wrong in saying, I was told, because I was on a site in Totnes for quite a few years, school down there, Kevick School, I think it was Drummond that went to school down there. And when I'm 48 now, they did those, I don't know if everyone remembers those posters, the Lord of the Rings posters.
Oh, Jimmy Courtney.
Jimmy Courtney. Yeah, and he did that when he was at 16 or something, doing his final years at school. He did those posters. Yeah. Now I don't know how much if he got a penny for every one of those posters. When I was like 19, every hippie in the country had like.
Well, we're of an age where I remember every high street had a shop called Athena, which is a poster shop.
Oh God!
Remember Athena?
Yeah. Shame.
Well, Jimmy Courtney stuff that was sold today. He must have,
But where Bill Drummond was on his 60th, I believe, for 17 hours he stood through the rain and the wind and the misery at the bust of Carl Jung. Yes, the pool of life itself.
On the power of money and the ability to use that as a concept and as an idea, I don't know how many people know about the revolution that happened. I believe it was South America, but I think you all know exactly, where they got the whole entire country to start writing on the money and their thoughts about money and the concept. Was it Argentina?
Yeah.
Was it Argentina?
Really?
This is about the 80s. No,
there was a huge period of hyperinflation in Argentina. Was that before or after?
See, this is where my history of the notion rather than the actual occurrence. Sadly lucky. But so basically, the concept was by writing on the note and deflowering the picture of the Queen or the President or anything else with their thoughts and their concepts meant those notes had to be taken out of circulation, instantly causing hyperinflation. And those got took down circulation. The bank went down and the government went down. It's such a beautiful concept about actually the power of money as a concept and how you can take it apart.
So I would suggest when you get all your money in, you could just write some small things on it.
I did actually go for a
Take
period.
it out, exactly.
Oh, it's
doing
electronic money.
But in Generation X, in Douglas Copeland's book, Generation X, there's a thing about writing on money, and it's usually things. The one that springs to mind is "You are not your ego." You'd write "You are not your ego," and I think I went through a phase of writing "You are not your ego" on bunnies, and I had it in an Asda, and the woman sort of looked at me, and I felt a bit embarrassed. And
I would suggest that when you've got loads of money and you're trying to use it to fund, how would I put it, political protest of a slightly subversive means, and you're trying to spend that money in Tesco's in South Wales, it goes down really not well.
There's a time and a place. Time and a place. Any more questions?
Yeah, completely changed the subject slightly from money, but see, I've read Cosmic Trigger fairly recently, actually, and one thing that struck me reading it fairly recently is the optimism of the book, which seems very out of step with how culture is now. That's something we seem to have lost in the counterculture as well as the wider culture. And I'm talking about the optimism in terms of human evolution, all the stuff about immortality research really isn't something anybody's doing or bothering about anymore. You know, a lot of the more philosophical ideas we talked about tonight are still in currency in the counterculture, but that kind of optimism about human nature and about that we're here to evolve and go on, that it would be a good thing for people now to kind of live forever, is gone. I don't think it's like the best we can hope for now is to kind of like maintain the status quo, and probably we feel like I think the belief in progress has gone.
Definitely.
In fact,
in many ways, it's a big problem in bringing Robert Anton Wilson to readers in the 21st century, is because a lot of all that sort of stuff has not been panned out, and there seems to be that sense that it was just pure idealism and well thought out, even though he does make it very clear that he's not saying these things have definitely happened, but this is all what he sort of hopes will sort of happen. And where was I going? I had a point that I was making there somewhere.
But he gets accused that, the space migration, the immortality stuff that he cooks up with Leary, he's kind of accused of escapism a lot of the time, even, by his contemporaries. And his great answer that I loved to that was, on a planet that increasingly resembles a maximum security jail, the only intelligent thing to do is start planning a jailbreak. And they had that lovely formula of the future, which I absolutely adore, which is SMILE. SMI to the power of 2 LE. So it stands for space migration, intelligence to the power of 2, so intelligence increase, life extension. And the feeling was, if you nailed any 1/3 of that formula, so if life extension would mean that we'd have to get off the planet because the planet can't take people living for a huge amount of time. We have to then get out. But equally, if you nail space migration, you've got to live longer because the time it takes to travel between planets is so long. But also, if you get off the planet, you suddenly look back and have the experience that those people who've been lucky enough to do so have had of seeing our beautiful planet as one single thing, what Barbara Marx Hubbard calls our baby pictures of the universal mind, and go, oh shit, what are we all doing fighting with each other, and intelligence increases. So I think there is a wonderful kind of positive formula there, but exactly like you say, it's really that those ideas, those real lyrical utopianism, as Wilson calls it, is swamped in a lot of negative. And I think that's really as good a reason as any for bringing it back and having some fun with this stuff. And
because Wilson and Leary never got the environmental side of it. No. They dismissed it. It was like, oh, it's Boy Scouts tidying up after themselves. We're moving beyond that. We're thinking much far beyond that, and that doesn't kind of fit with us at the moment. The life extension, the environmental impact of that would just be crazy. So I think that's brought a lot of that down. But I still think just the core of Wilson's philosophy is valuable and needs bringing through.
I think there's a weird thing which is kind of like, I don't know, I studied critical theory for quite a while, and there's this trend in this thing that Adorno and Horkheimer called the negative relationships to truth, like negative dialectics and stuff like that. And I've just been reading Illuminatus recently, and as I'm reading through that, I'm seeing a lot of those kind of relationships. They're actually quite similar. There's a reciprocal thing. There is a kind of negative relationship to truth, but I think it's done in a much more. It's done towards established consensus reality as opposed to a kind of dialectical model of head down kind of arborescent truth. And I feel like some people have. In countercultures, it's quite easy to take that negativity towards truth, which is essentially about trolling truth, you know, which I love. Like, it's become a kind of lifestyle negativity, which means that everyone feels absolutely impotent in their own positions, and because people have got less and less money and less and, you know, they're kind of constantly pressured by, you know, Tories or whatever else it is, you know, like a general oppression of truth. Like that negative relationship feels like it's like a last bastion, but it's a kind of survival mechanism. And I think, like, with what Ben was saying about, like, you know, that lyrical utopianism going, I think often it's because of that. It's because of the kind of cynicism which the mainstream culture infiltrates the counterculture with as a kind of divide and conquer method, you know. It's like, I don't know, maybe I'm being paranoid about it, maybe it's much more random than it actually is, but, you know.
But you know, Wilson said growing up in the Depression, as he did, in the Irish Quarter of, you know, during the Depression, he said optimism was considered a form of mental, you know, of mental health issue. And yet he maintained it throughout his life. So it's not that he was living in this wildly optimistic time. You know, I mean, yes, there was that during, you know, as we know, but he maintained it as a belief that it actually would allow you to activate, that the mind, the optimistic mind will see solutions that the negative mind simply will not see. And that, he thought, just pragmatically meant you gotta stay completely open to, you know, to what might happen. And he rallied constantly against, you know, artists like Burroughs, who he felt sort of, you know, you were only serious and worthy of note if you were in a state of suffering, essentially. You know, that kind of equation, he was not into that.
It's probably telling that Burroughs is a lot more popular now than Wilson is.
There you go. Fits the time better.
Being that we live in an era where people who like joining the dots now find the hugest, most outrageous conspiracies, ones that even Robert Anton Wilson would have problems dreaming up. You know, does that not worry you that unleashing the cosmic trigger as such means that people...
I will be handing out rainbow knickers at the door. I'm very worried, yes.
You need to remind people that giraffes aren't real, for instance. It's a very important fact. It does worry me that we now live in this era that people have this ability to see and connect everything. But I think I couldn't quite understand what you were saying. It sounded good. Sorry. But people's critical thinking now, like, comes to a really negative, depressing idea that we cannot fight what exists at all. They are omnipotent and omnipresent. You know?
The whole point of Illuminatus was to throw every single contrasting and contradictory conspiracy in there until you either come out totally agnostic or utterly paranoid. Unfortunately, a lot of people came out utterly paranoid. Which, you know,
it's got worse.
It sort of got worse. But the aim of Wilson's work is to provoke that agnosticism. But it's weird. I mean, teenagers these days genuinely believe that, you know, Jay-Z is working for the Illuminati. The reason Beyonce is successful is because Jay-Z's sacrificing her to the Illuminati. And have these big discussions on Tumblr about, he's totally the Illuminati. No, he's definitely not the Illuminati. They don't have... Does the Illuminati exist? They don't ask that question.
Can we kidnap Alex Jones, or is it Bill Hicks, and bring him to
we need more Bill Hicks, definitely.
Well, I mean, Alex Jones is Bill Hicks.
Oh, okay.
Obviously,
Alex Jones as well. The third umbrella.
I like that theory.
That's a very interesting theory.
Not mine even.
Yeah.
I think Alex Jones is quite dangerous.
I agree,
He's Alex James.
He runs a...
No, not Alex James.
Too many similar names.
Of, like, weird conspiracies between people you know are going to agree with you.
Yeah.
And then these social media sites are just wiping out.
We know we're going to agree
any
with
sort
what
of
they're saying, and you might agree with what I'm saying.
Any sort of force that's happened,
and a bit cyclical.
By just pressing a button on Facebook these days saying, "I
sure, if we really believe in this stuff, we should actually start preaching it to other people."
It's not the same straight on the streets, is it?
I feel like I'm sat in a room where
there's more people paranoid than...
I'm sorry, mate.
Alright, guys, this is getting too many people talking over each other.
Basically, in the late 80s, well, beginning from the 60s to the late 80s, early 90s, basically people were well up for the fight. And basically, since a lot of bills have come in, like basically, the people even like the students that have gone out to like protest and they've got cattle and everything, and there's been a lot of intelligence on what they think is them. It's made people more paranoid to go out and basically fucking show the force, show the power of love and the fucking that we can fucking change things. But
yeah, even in a way, not necessarily going out and rioting. You know, I was in the bean field, I was in the poll tax riot.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, right.
And that's one way of doing things, but you can go out and do things that are positive in a physical sense.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah,
sure.
you can go out on the streets and do positive things. You can do street theatre, you can do things like that.
Yeah.
Many laws have come in, but people sit at home now on social media sites and just press a button to say, yeah, I like this.
I might jump in here and say that's not what we're doing here, and that's not what these guys are doing here as well. And I think the thing is, like, it's I don't know, it's very possible to. I mean, preaching is a funny word. You know, Dan used that word. I mean, I feel very strange about the concept of preaching. My granddad was a Christian preacher, for example. I don't want to be a preacher like he was. You know, that seems to me all about belief and not about suspecting or supposing at all, and not about exploring at all. But I think, like, going and doing these sorts of things and like exploring the ideas of someone like Robert Anton Wilson, or creating things that are kind of coming from the well of the stuff we've learned from those sorts of things, or from, you know, related things or unrelated things that have given us that kind of those kind of cosmic trigger moments in our lives or whatever. Like, you know, we can go out and share those things, and I don't know, you guys may have more to say on this, and some of you may have more to say on this, but for me, I think I see, I don't know what potential I see in things, but I see more potential in those things affecting some change in other people's minds, which might affect change more widely than I do in a protest or something that people will just take on a very surface level.
A protest doesn't have to be a violent thing in any shape.
No, of course not.
Protest can itself be an art form.
And all respect to you for those being involved in those protests, because that, you know,
we changed a lot of people and turned a lot of people into our form of thinking.
I'm not suggesting people go out and smash windows and throw vegetable bombs at all.
Yeah.
I'm just saying that with this cyber generation we have, that like button.
But there's a flip side. There's a flip side of it. Is now that the network has connected everyone, there's been this wave of transparency passing over every institution, everything. Whether it's the South Yorkshire Police, whether it's the Vatican, whether it's the BBC, with the MP's expenses, and we're just much more aware now of all these sort of institutionalised corners of corruption that have been building up for so years. And in many ways it's just a bit overpowering. It's like everyone's corrupt and there's no hope and they're all fucking But at the same time, the legitimacy of all these institutions is starting to be questioned and things like that. And the thought that corruptions might build up in them, it seems less and less and less likely. So I don't know which way it's going. I can't tell you anything about that. But it's interesting at the moment, and the network is working in our favour as well as against it. It's a weird thing.
Yeah, it'd be good to turn more people on to it.
Hence we're just trying to talk about.
And you know, the last line of Cosmic Trigger, he says, he's talking, his daughter is... Oh, sorry.
Come on.
Yeah.
Sorry, carry on.
You're talking?
You talk, David.
I was just going to say, you know, the last line of... The last line of Cosmic Trigger is Robert Anton Wilson, tragically, his daughter is murdered. So he has a real kind of awful thing that he has to go through. But he's talking to Tim Leary, who's, you know, survived however many years in jail. He was in jail and just stayed utterly positive. And someone says to Tim Leary right at the end of the book, you know, I mean, how do you do it? What do you do? And he says, you just got to keep coming back at them with all the positive energy you can muster. And the final thing is, and thus I learned the final secret of the Illuminati. That, you know, that it's kind of absolutely what we're discussing here. We got to stay optimistic and positive. That's the only way we're going to activate the circuits that allow us to get out of this.
Yes, that's
this thing.
There's a bloke with his hand up at the back.
Yeah, come on. What we were talking about last night, Dan.
Guy with his hand up.
Talking about last night.
I wanted to
the levels.
Yes. I just wanted to share something. I went to see Robert Anton Wilson about 25 years ago, maybe. He was speaking at ULU, and
my friend asked him a question, which was a fucking stupid question, really. But Robert Anton Wilson's answer was fucking perfect, and it relates a little to what we're talking about here. My friend, and I think it was one of these things, he thought of it and it was clever, so he said it, but actually the answer is genius, and I think it really points to what Robert Anton Wilson would have to say politically about what we're discussing. My friend asked him, do you believe in revolution, evolution, or devolution? Robert Anton Wilson thought about this for a second, and he just looked at him and said, I'll take all three.
Yeah. Someone said to my dad not long before he died, what, Ken, do you believe in an afterlife? And he said, yeah, I'm all for it.
It reminds me of the Tom Waits interview when he was really, really keen into the 80s, and he's on some like shit provincial deep south cable television show before he's enormously famous, and they say to him, he goes, so Mr. Waits, how would you like to die? And he goes, I don't think I would like that very much at all.
Well, fuck all of this. It reminds me of last night when somebody said, let's go to this talk tonight and let's learn something tonight. All this stuff is historic. Like, why is all this stuff so historical? We're doing it now, right? Surely we're talking about it now.
Well, should we have something really contemporary? Let's chuck this into the mix.
Don't use the word contemporary,
no,
like it's ridiculous.
Let's have something immediate then. I don't know which word you'd like. Consider this as a contemporary, sorry for the word, tension. Mark Zuckerberg said there is no longer any such thing as privacy, and yet who was at the head of the charge against GCHQ and all the other intelligence agencies prying on people's supposedly private Facebook postings, emails and so on? This is the essence of the contemporary difficulty of the newly born social media, the coming into being of an international shared consciousness, which is actually being articulated rather than being merely experienced. I think it's an extraordinary time, and what we personally think and feel about what should or could be private, what should or could be shared, what the purpose of that, what the goal, if any, is, what the quality of the journey is. I think that's really interesting stuff. We're in amazing times right now. And I agree with you, there's no need to dig out the history. Now is a really interesting time.
I think it's interesting to explore it sometimes though, isn't it, and to play with it. And something that I find really interesting about this Cosmic Trigger project actually, and I don't really know, it's kind of hard for me to articulate it fully, is that when I read Illuminatus, kind of would have been about 5 years ago, I kind of went through a whole thing, and it had been a big part of my life kind of previously to that and things like that. And I kind of went through a whole thing of like, oh, hang on, like all the people around me that are into this, and I know that they are, and they've kind of brought me into it in a funny sort of, not particularly bring me into it kind of a way like people do and all of that. But there's nobody sort of right now kind of talking about these things as they are, and like really kind of exploring that, because I feel like there's still a lot here that hasn't been kind of got out of it by most people, and that could be useful for people and could be interesting and fun for people, and I find it quite exciting really to be now at a moment where I hear about you, Daisy, doing this, and you guys talking about Bob and everything, and it's like that's really cool. But there's also this tiny little bit of me, and it's really only started eating in since I got involved with organising this talk, saying like, well, I feel really good about this, so I think it is going in exactly the right way, and it will be what needs to happen. But there's that little bit of me as well going, oh, this is a bit strange, hang on, is this a kind of Discordian history making? Is this a kind of writing the book, putting the frame around? And what is that for people like us? I mean, really, what is that, and what will we do with it? I've got no idea,
But every sphere of culture needs to reflect on what its legacy is,
absolutely,
and where it came from.
Absolutely.
And so do we as a subculture and a counterculture.
Absolutely.
It's part of that, but I think also it's exactly the sort of thing I've struggled with, because I don't want something that's dry and dusty and a piece of history, and oh look, wasn't it fun back then, guys? What a shame it's not like that anymore. Really not
exactly.
Like that at all. And actually, what's been so fascinating for me is that putting out something that felt like I was very much led to it by this sort of series of synchronicities has, you know, could not have anticipated 6 months ago that, you know, that a room like this would be filled, that the Liverpool sort of 300 people would show up, that they'd give anything that they could, because these books have touched people's lives in a really powerful way. And it's, you know, when Timothy Leary was asked, well, what do you do after you've turned on, tuned in and dropped out? And he said, find the others. And it's like, that's, for me, that's what this is. This is a way, and look, here we all are having the fucking best conversation I've had for at least, you know, woo! You know what I mean? So,
my point before was basically to say that what you're doing is an absolutely wonderful thing, and to do this festival will actually wake people up again back to the time I was talking about, because I think that people are asleep and more like drones to the to advertising or whatever subliminal bullshit, you know, but to have this again to open people's eyes, along with I'm sure other things that are happening at this exact time, other places on this earth.
It's fertile soil, man. You kick this. I mean, this book is an attempt to kick all that stuff from the 70s, you know, forward. I didn't realise what fertile soil it was landing on. It's just people are just waiting for it. It's just When's what? Sorry. When's the premiere?
November the 23rd.
Sorry, I'm being India on November the 23rd. Can you put it on November the 27th?
It will not happen! Brilliant.
I don't get it.
What don't you get, Dan?
The joke. What's the joke?
Oh, it was from earlier.
It was from earlier.
Oh.
The original, the Illuminati play, they wanted to put on a Friday.
Don't worry, you just had to be there.
You weren't there. It's in the now.
The structure in my lungs
Yeah, it was
so
the history.
long.
Yeah.
You could fucking ball a tennis ball.
Oh, Dan.
Have we got any more questions before I need to get to the bar?
Yeah.
I was just calling me.
What are you drinking?
Does anyone have a last question? Or we can all carry on these conversations. We can all carry on these conversations upstairs as well, can't we?
How?
Yeah, brilliant.
Maybe.
How?
Maybe.
It will bring about change, but of an unpredictable nature.
Be there on the 27th of November. And you'll
Be there on the 27th of November and you'll be 5 days late.
You'll either miss the good stuff or you'll nail it.
What difference does any of this make?
Carry on this at the bar.
We'll wait and
Thank
see,
you all
Dan.
for
We'll wait and
coming.
see. Thanks, everyone.